Morningstar receives a lot of reader questions from our own publications and from the Morningstar tables in various newspapers and magazines. Now, the person on the end of a lot of those questions would be our communications manager, Philip Gray, who's probably answered a lot more than anyone else. Philip, how are you? What would be the number one question that you're asked?
Thanks, Nicole. Look, I think the number one question that we get from people is, why doesn't my fund have a star rating? And there's a couple of reasons behind that. One is that to get a star rating, a fund has to have at least 3 years track record. And I think secondly, the fund has to be in a category where there are a sufficient number of other funds for us to be able to calculate a normal distribution and produce the stars from 1 to 5 stars in the category of funds.
So what do the stars mean?
So the stars are a risk-adjusted historical assessment. So they're a historical assessment of how a fund has performed compared to similar kinds of funds. And they don't take into account just returns, they also take risk into account as well. So essentially a 5-star fund or a 4-star fund is a fund which has produced better returns while taking less risk than its peers. And a 1 or 2-star fund is a fund that has produced poor returns compared to its peers while taking higher levels of risk.
So how can I use them? Is it the same as a recommendation?
That's a great question. So the recommendation is the other side of the research that we do by our fund research team, and the two are complementary. The star rating is backwards looking and it tells you, it's like a report card if you like, on how the fund has done. The recommendation by the fund research team is a forward looking assessment. That's based on analysis of the people running the fund, the process that they use, the research that they do, the overall investment strategy. And so that's what we call a qualitative or forward-looking assessment.
Well, what other things do readers ask?
Wide range of questions, really ranging from what's happened to my fund. It may have been suppressed temporarily because we're not happy with the data quality that we're receiving from fund managers. We get a lot of questions about why funds haven't appeared in the tables that we publish in newspapers. That's often because, although there are more than 10,000 funds offered in Australia, the newspapers can't give us 5 pages worth of space to be able to publish information. So really we have to make a call about that, and the call that we've made is that the bigger funds which have the more money in them are the ones that get into the tables in the newspapers and magazines.
Because they have the most investors?
That's right. That's because there are more people invested in them, therefore the tables will appeal to a wider range of readers.
Does Morningstar charge to have these funds researched?
Unlike some other research houses, we don't charge fund managers to do research on their funds. If a fund manager does want to take that research and use it in its marketing material, then we do charge them a licensing fee for that. And that's a fairly standard kind of practice for a publisher.
So we can still claim to be independent?
Yeah, we certainly can, because there's no direct relationship between any money passing hands between the fund manager and us in terms of the research that we produce.
So as an investor, how would I get started?
That's a great question, and I think a lot of that comes down to why you're actually investing in the first place. And that will then determine what kind of fund you're looking at investing in. If you're investing primarily perhaps for income, then you would look at certain kinds of funds. If you're wanting to invest for capital growth, maybe you want to save up and buy a house, or you're thinking about school fees for your kids in a few years' time, then you'd be more likely to want to go for a fund that was more focused on growth, so a fund that invested more heavily in shares, international shares and listed property.
All right, let's talk about fees and how do they factor into our information?
The returns that we publish for funds are on a net of fee basis. In other words, they do take into account the ongoing fee that you have to pay as an investor in the fund. That could be maybe 1 or 2% of the amount you have invested in a fund each year, but they don't take into account what we might call transaction fees. So that's any entry or any exit fees that you may have to pay to get into or out of the fund. And increasingly, a lot of investors aren't paying those fees anyway, because they may be going through some of the online transaction services where they rebate the entry fee back to you in the form of additional units in the fund.
So Philip, how often do we update this data?
So the data on funds is updated at varying times. Each month we publish updated month-end returns for the funds, and that's generally at the end of the second week of the following month. So for example, if you were looking for information about the returns from funds at 31 July, they would be published in the end of the second week of August. The other data is updated as and when we receive it from fund managers. Often that's daily or every second day or weekly in the case of the unit prices. The star ratings are also updated and republished each month based on latest available information, and we generally update the information about fees when a fund manager rolls over its product disclosure statement.
How good are these fund managers in getting this data to us?
Well, a lot of fund managers are very good because they have very efficient back offices, so they're able to get us information on a regular basis. Obviously, yes, there are also some fund managers that we do have to chase from time to time to get the updated information to be able to publish it.
Thanks for your time today, Philip.
Thanks, Nicole.